The coffee pot shattered against the tile floor at the exact moment Deputy Victor Harlan's palm connected with Margaret Chen's shoulder. She crashed into the corner booth, her glasses flying, her wrist cracking against the hard edge. The Tuesday morning breakfast crowd went dead silent. Harlan laughed, a cold, ugly sound that echoed through Rosie's diner. "Watch where you're going, sweetheart. Maybe you people should learn some manners." He straightened his uniform, smirking at the trembling woman on the floor. He didn't see the man in the leather vest rise slowly from the counter behind him. Didn't see the military patches. Didn't notice the eyes that had just witnessed everything. If you enjoy stories about justice and courage, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel around the world. Margaret Chen had worked at Rosie's diner for 11 years. 11 years of early mornings' aching feet and coffee-stained aprons. 11 years of remembering that old Pete liked his eggs runny, and Mrs. Patterson needed extra napkins because her hands shook from Parkinson's. 11 years of building something after her husband's death left her with nothing but medical bills and memories. She never expected it to end on a Tuesday morning. "Order up, Maggie," Rosa's voice rang out from the kitchen. Margaret grabbed the plates, 2 stacks of pancakes for the Henderson twins, extra bacon, just like they always wanted, and turned toward the dining room. That's when she saw him. Deputy Victor Harlan stood at the entrance, his badge catching the morning light like a warning sign. He was a big man, 6'2", thick through the shoulders, with the kind of face that might have been handsome once, before cruelty carved lines into it. Margaret's hands tightened on the plates. "Morning, Deputy," Rosa called out nervously. "The usual." Harlan didn't answer. His eyes swept the diner like he owned it, like everyone in it existed only at his pleasure. Margaret tried to move past him. She had customers waiting. The Henderson twins were hungry. Old Pete needed his coffee refill. "Excuse me," she said softly. Harlan didn't move. "I said, excuse me, Deputy." He turned slowly, looked down at her. Margaret was 5'2" on a good day, and right now with her tired feet and aching back, she felt even smaller. "You in a hurry?" Harlan asked. His voice was soft, almost friendly. That was the dangerous part. The friendly part. "Just trying to do my job." "Your job?" he smiled. "Right. Your job is whatever I say it is. Your whole existence in my town is whatever I say it is. You understand that, right? You people need to understand your place." Margaret's jaw tightened. She'd heard this before, heard variations of it for 2 years now, ever since Harlan decided that Rosie's diner sat on property his family wanted. Ever since she refused to sell. "Please move, Deputy." She tried to step around him. His hand shot out and grabbed her arm. The plates wobbled. Pancakes slid. "I don't think you heard me." "Let go." "Or what?" he laughed. "You gonna call the cops?" "I am the cops, sweetheart. My uncle is the sheriff. My cousin is the DA. Who exactly are you going to complain to?" Margaret's heart pounded. The diner had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Everyone was afraid. That's when she made her mistake. She pulled her arm free. The motion was instinctive, defensive, the kind of thing any person would do when grabbed by someone who meant them harm. But to Victor Harlan, it was defiance. And Victor Harlan did not tolerate defiance. His palm connected with her shoulder like a sledgehammer. Margaret flew backward. The plates crashed. Pancakes scattered across the floor. Her hip hit the corner booth first. Then her wrist, a sharp, cracking pain that shot up her arm like lightning. Her glasses flew off her face, skittering across the tile. She lay there, stunned, pain radiating through her body. And Victor Harlan laughed. "Clumsy little thing, aren't you?" He adjusted his gun belt, completely unconcerned. Someone should really teach you people how to walk. Maybe then you wouldn't be such a hazard." No one moved. The Henderson twins stared at their empty table, terrified. Mrs. Patterson clutched her purse like a shield. Old Pete, 78-years-old veteran of Korea, looked down at his coffee, shame burning in his eyes. No one said a word. No one ever did. That's when the man at the counter stood up. Jake Morrison hadn't planned on being in Cedar Falls, Texas. Hadn't planned on stopping at a small-town diner for breakfast. Hadn't planned on witnessing what he'd just witnessed. But life rarely went according to plan. 40 years in the Marine Corps had taught him that. He rose slowly from his counter stool. At 61, he didn't move as fast as he used to, but he still moved with purpose. His leather vest creaked, worn soft from decades of rides decorated with patches that told his story. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Master Sergeant USMC retired, President Brothers of the Road MC. The other customers saw him for the first time, saw the size of him 6'3", still solid despite the gray in his beard, saw the patches, saw the calm, cold fury in his eyes. Harlan saw none of this. His back was still turned. He was still laughing. "Something funny, Deputy?" Harlan spun around. His hand dropped to his gun instinctively, then froze when he saw what he was facing. Jake stood 10 feet away. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present, like a mountain that had suddenly appeared in the middle of the room. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Jake Morrison, but that's not important right now." Jake's voice was even controlled. "What's important is that you just assaulted that woman." Harlan's eyes flickered. Something shifted in his face, the first hint of uncertainty. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar arrogance. "Assaulted? She tripped. You saw it. Everyone saw it. Right?" He looked around the diner, daring anyone to contradict him. No one spoke. Jake didn't look away from Harlan. "I saw a law enforcement officer grab an unarmed woman and shove her to the ground. I saw him laugh about it. And I saw him make racist comments while she was lying there hurt." "Watch your mouth, old man." "I'm watching a lot of things right now, Deputy, including 12 witnesses to what you just did." Harlan's hand tightened on his gun belt. "You threatening me? I don't make threats." Jake took one step forward. Just one. But it changed everything. "I'm telling you that I've faced men who wanted to kill me in 3 different wars. Men who were trained to kill. Men who had nothing to lose. You don't scare me, not even a little bit." For a long moment, no one breathed. Margaret pushed herself up from the floor, cradling her wrist. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where her glasses had caught her face. She looked at Jake with confusion. Who was this stranger? Why was he risking himself for her? "You're making a big mistake," Harlan said finally. His voice had lost some of its swagger. "You don't know who I am in this town." "I know exactly who you are. You're a bully with a badge. You're a small man who feels big when he's hurting people who can't fight back." Jake's eyes never wavered. "But here's what you don't know. You don't know who I am. You don't know the brothers parked outside. And you don't know what happens next if you don't walk out of here right now." Harlan looked toward the window. For the first time, he noticed the motorcycles. 12 of them chrome gleaming in the morning sun. And standing beside them, watching the diner, were 12 more men in leather vests. Men with the same patches Jake wore. Men who looked like they'd seen war and hadn't forgotten how to fight one. "This isn't over," Harlan said. "No," Jake agreed. "It's not." Harlan straightened his uniform, tried to recover some dignity. He pointed at Margaret. "You and me were going to finish our conversation later, when your new friend isn't around to protect you. Deputy, Jake's voice stopped him at the door. You touch her again, you even look at her wrong, and I won't need to call the cops. I'll handle it myself. And unlike you, I don't make empty threats. Harlan's face twisted with rage. But he saw the men outside, saw the patches, saw the look in Jake's eyes. And for the first time in 15 years of terrorizing Cedar Falls, Victor Harlan backed down. The door slammed behind him. Margaret couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just the pain, though her wrist was swelling badly, and the cut on her forehead stung with every heartbeat. It was the aftermath of terror, the adrenaline draining from her system, the realization of what had almost happened. Ma'am? Jake knelt beside her. Up close, she could see the lines on his face, the gray in his beard, the kindness in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Can I help you up? Yes, thank you. He took her good hand, gentle, careful, the hands of someone who knew how to be strong without being rough, helped her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed. Rosa, get me the first aid kit, he called out. Then softer, that wrist needs to be looked at. Might be broken. I can't afford... Margaret stopped herself. Why was she telling this stranger her problems? Why was she explaining anything? Let's worry about that later. Jake guided her to a booth away from the broken plates, away from the scattered food, away from the spot where she'd fallen. Right now, let's just make sure you're okay. Rosa hurried over with a white plastic box. Her hands were shaking too. Dios mío, Maggie. Are you all right? I've never seen him that bad. I thought he was going to... She's fine, Jake said firmly. She's going to be fine. He opened the kit, found gauze and antiseptic. Looked at Margaret. May I? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He cleaned the cut on her forehead with surprising gentleness. What's your name? Margaret. Margaret Chen. I'm Jake, the loud guy in the leather vest. A small smile, an attempt to lighten the moment. That deputy got a habit of treating people like that. Margaret's laugh came out as something closer to a sob. You could say that. How long? 2 years, ever since his family decided they wanted my diner. Jake's hands paused. His eyes met hers. Your diner. I own Rosie's. Have since my husband passed. It's not much, but it's mine. It's all I have left of him. She wiped her eyes with her good hand. The Harlans own half this town. They want to own the other half. Victor's job is to encourage people to sell. And when they don't, then things start happening. Health violations that never existed, vandalism that never gets investigated, accidents. She looked at her swollen wrist. Like this one. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, where's the sheriff in all this? Roy Harlan, Victor's uncle. And the DA, Marcus Harlan, Victor's cousin. Jesus. Praying hasn't helped much either. Jake sat back. Through the window he could see his brothers still standing by their bikes, watching. They'd wait as long as he needed. That was the thing about family. Real family, chosen family. They waited. Mrs. Chen, Margaret. Margaret. He nodded. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Has anyone ever tried to stop him? Has anyone ever stood up? A few. Margaret's voice dropped. They're not here anymore. What do you mean? Elena Rodriguez owned the flower shop on Main Street. She refused to sell. Her store burned down 3 months later. Investigation called it electrical, but everyone knew. She moved to Austin. Samuel Thompson. He's a veteran like you, Victor, pulled him over, planted drugs in his car. Would have gone to prison if a witness hadn't come forward. And Pastor Mitchell. His church has been fighting code violations for a year now. Every time he fixes one thing, they find another. Jake listened. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something hardened. And no one's done anything about this. No state police, no FBI. Who's going to tell them everyone's too scared? And even if someone did... Margaret shrugged helplessly. The Harlans have been here for 3 generations. They know people, important people. Nothing sticks to them. Rosa brought over 2 cups of coffee, set them down without a word. Her eyes were wet. "Thank you," Jake said. He wrapped his hands around the mug, felt the warmth seep into his calloused palms. Thought about what Margaret had told him. Thought about the fear he'd seen in the diner. Thought about Victor Harlan's laugh as a woman lay bleeding on the floor. "You should go," Margaret said quietly. "You and your friends. Leave Cedar Falls. Forget about today." "Why would I do that?" "Because you can. Because this isn't your fight. Because Victor won't forget what you did, and neither will his uncle." She touched his arm, a brief contact, warm, despite her trembling. "You seem like a good man. I don't want you getting hurt because of me." Jake looked at her for a long moment. This small woman with the broken glasses and swollen wrist. This widow who worked double shifts and gave free coffee to homeless veterans. This stranger who, even after being attacked, was worried about someone else's safety. He thought about his daughter. About the calls for help that went unanswered. About the police who did nothing. About the guilt he'd carried for 12 years. "Margaret," he said slowly, "I've spent my whole life running toward trouble, not away from it. My brothers outside, they've done the same thing. We didn't fight overseas just to come home and watch Americans terrorize Americans. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." He finished his coffee. Set the mug down. "I understand that you've been fighting alone for 2 years. I understand that everyone in this town is scared. And I understand that men like Victor Harlan only exist because good people are too afraid to stop them." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "And you're going to stop him just like that one man against the whole town?" Jake smiled. For the first time, it reached his eyes. "Not one man, Margaret. 13. And by the time we're done, I promise you this town will never be the same." He stood, reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, handed it to her. "That's my cell number. Anything happens, anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Understood?" Margaret looked at the card, looked at this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere, looked at the men outside who were now watching the diner like guardian angels in leather and chrome. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Jake paused at the door. His hand rested on the frame, and for a moment he seemed very far away. "Because 12 years ago my daughter needed help. She called the police. They did nothing. She called again. They did nothing. By the time I got there..." He stopped, swallowed. "I couldn't save her, Margaret. But maybe I can save you. Maybe I can save this town." He stepped outside. The morning sun caught the patches on his vest, the eagle, the globe, the anchor, the symbols of everything he'd fought for. His phone was already in his hand. "Marcus, it's Jake. I need you to run a name for me." He looked back at the diner, at the small woman watching him through the window. "Victor Harlan, Deputy Sheriff, Cedar Falls, Texas. And I need everything. Every complaint, every lawsuit, every shadow this bastard has ever cast." He listened for a moment. "No, brother. This isn't a favor. This is a mission." He hung up, walked toward his bike. His brothers gathered around him, men he'd served with, men he'd bled with, men who'd never let him down. "What's the play, Ironside?" That was Tommy, his sergeant at arms. 20 years Army 3 tours in Afghanistan. Jake looked at the road leading out of town, then at the road leading deeper in, at the sheriff's station, at the courthouse, at all the places where injustice had found a home. "We're staying," he said. For how long? Jake swung his leg over his bike. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that shook the morning air. For as long as it takes. Victor Harlan was pacing. This was bad. This was very bad. His office at the sheriff's station felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects. Who was that old man? Where did he come from? And why hadn't anyone warned him that 13 bikers had rolled into town? Calm down. Sheriff Roy Harlan sat behind his desk, watching his nephew with mild irritation. You're acting like a child who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. You didn't see him, Uncle Roy. The way he looked at me. The things he said. What did he say? Victor stopped pacing. He said he'd handle it himself if I touched her again. Said he didn't make empty threats. And you believed him. He had patches, Uncle Roy. Military patches. Real ones. And the way he moved, I've seen that before. Men who know how to kill and don't hesitate. Roy leaned back in his chair. He was 67, heavy-set, with a face that had seen better days, and hands that had done worse things. He'd been sheriff of Cedar Falls for 22 years, and in that time he'd built an empire. Property. Influence. Fear. No one had ever seriously challenged him. Bikers pass through all the time, he said dismissively. They'll be gone by tomorrow. These weren't ordinary bikers. What makes you say that? Victor pulled out his phone, showed his uncle the picture he'd taken from the diner window, zoomed in on the patches, on the names, on the symbols. Brothers of the Road MC. I looked them up. They're veterans, all of them, Marines, Army, Navy, and their president. He pointed at Jake's picture. Jake Morrison, Master Sergeant retired, 2 Purple Hearts, 3 combat tours. Roy's expression shifted, just slightly, but Victor knew his uncle well enough to recognize concern. What do you want me to do about it? Run them out of town. Make up something. Anything. Before this becomes a problem. On what grounds? Who cares about grounds? You're the sheriff. Roy stood up, walked to the window. Outside, he could see the main street of Cedar Falls, the town his family had controlled for 3 generations. The town that belonged to them. You're right about one thing, he said slowly. This could become a problem. He turned back to Victor. But we don't run from problems, son. We solve them. How? Roy smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Everyone has a weakness, Victor. Everyone has something they're afraid of, something they love, something they can't afford to lose. He put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Find this Jake Morrison's weakness. And when you do, we'll make sure he regrets ever stopping in Cedar Falls. Margaret didn't go to the hospital. Couldn't afford it. Instead, she wrapped her wrist herself tight enough to keep it still and went back to work. The diner felt different now. The customers were quiet. Rosa kept glancing toward the door. Even old Pete, who usually stayed until closing, left after his second cup of coffee. Everyone was waiting. You should go home, Rosa said. Rest. That wrist. I'm fine. Maggie, I said I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Her wrist throbbed with every movement. Her head ached where the cut pulled at her skin. And underneath all of it, the fear coiled in her stomach like a living thing. Victor would come back. He always came back. The bell above the door chimed. Margaret froze. Her good hand gripped the coffee pot so hard her knuckles went white. But it wasn't Victor. It was an old woman, 80 if she was a day, with white hair and sharp eyes and a cane that she used more for pointing than walking. Well, well, she said, looking around the nearly empty diner. I heard there was quite a show this morning. Mrs. Clayton. Margaret set down the coffee pot. I didn't expect to see you. Didn't expect to be here. She lowered herself into a booth with a grunt. But when I heard that someone finally stood up to Victor Harlan, I had to come see for myself. News travels fast. In this town, news travels at the speed of fear. Mrs. Clayton fixed her with a look. Tell me about him. The biker. The one who stopped Victor. Margaret hesitated. Then she sat down across from the old woman and told her everything. The confrontation. The words. The way Jake had knelt beside her, cleaned her wound, promised to help. When she finished, Mrs. Clayton was quiet for a long moment. Do you know who that man is? He said his name was Jake Morrison. Jake Ironside Morrison. Mrs. Clayton nodded slowly. I know that name. Knew his father, actually, back before the Morrison family moved away from Texas. You knew his father. Robert Morrison. Good man. Honest. The kind who couldn't look away from injustice. She smiled sadly. It got him killed in the end. Heart attack, they said. But some of us knew better. Some of us remembered what he was investigating before he died. Margaret felt cold. What was he investigating? Mrs. Clayton leaned forward. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Roy Harlan. The first Sheriff Harlan Roy's father, and the things that family has been doing for 3 generations. She patted Margaret's hand. You've got a guardian angel now, child. Don't waste it. What do you mean? I mean that Jake Morrison isn't just some random biker passing through. He's exactly what this town has been waiting for. Mrs. Clayton stood up, leaning on her cane. The question is, are we ready to help him? She walked out without ordering anything. Margaret sat alone in the empty booth, watching her go. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The bikers were still there. She could see them from the window. 13 figures in leather and chrome keeping watch. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Still there? Still watching? Call if you need us. Jake. Margaret stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back 2 words. Thank you. 3 dots appeared. Then a response. Don't thank me yet, Margaret. This is just the beginning. She didn't know what that meant, didn't know what was coming. But for the first time in 2 years, the fear in her stomach was joined by something else. Something that felt like hope. 3 days passed before Jake got the call he'd been waiting for. Brother, you sitting down? Marcus Williams' voice crackled through the phone. Because what I found, it's worse than we thought. Jake stood outside the motel where his club had set up camp. The Cedar Falls Motor Lodge wasn't much. 12 rooms, a broken ice machine, and a manager who asked too many questions, but it was home for now. Tell me. Victor Harlan has 23 official complaints on file. 23 Jake. Assault, harassment, intimidation, civil rights violations. You know how many resulted in disciplinary action? 0. Not even a written warning. Every single complaint was investigated by his uncle's department and dismissed. Every single one. Jake's jaw tightened. What else? 3 women filed restraining orders against him over the past decade. All 3 withdrew their complaints within a month. All 3 moved out of state shortly after. He threatened them. That's my guess. But here's where it gets interesting. Marcus paused. Jake could hear papers shuffling. 8 years ago, there was a witness in a federal corruption case. Guy named Daniel Collins. He was going to testify against the Harlan family, something about land deals, falsified documents, bribery. 2 weeks before the trial, Daniel Collins was found dead in his garage. Gunshot wound to the head. Ruled a suicide. You don't believe that? The man had a 7-year-old daughter, Jake. He was about to blow the whistle on the most powerful family in town, and we're supposed to believe he killed himself. Jake closed his eyes. He thought about Margaret, about the fear in her voice, about the swollen wrist she tried to hide behind her coffee pot. What happened to the daughter? Sarah Collins. She's 35 now, lives in Austin, works as a nurse. Another pause. Jake, I tracked her down, made some calls. She's been waiting 8 years for someone to ask about her father. Did she say anything? She said she has something that proves Victor Harlan killed her father. But she won't tell me what it is over the phone. She wants to meet, face to face. Jake looked at the row of motorcycles parked outside the motel. His brothers were inside waiting for orders. They'd followed him into firefights, into ambushes, into situations where the odds said they shouldn't survive. They'd follow him into this, too. Set up the meeting. Already done. Tomorrow morning. Austin. I'll text you the address. Jake hung up. For a long moment, he just stood there, feeling the weight of what was coming. 23 complaints, 3 women driven out of town, a dead witness, and a daughter who'd been waiting 8 years for justice. This wasn't just about Margaret anymore. This was about an entire town held hostage by one family's cruelty. Tommy appeared in the doorway behind him. News? Yeah. Jake turned to face his sergeant-at-arms. Gather the brothers. We need to talk. The motel room was cramped with 13 men crowded inside. Jake stood by the window, while his brothers filled every available space, sitting on beds, leaning against walls, crouching on the floor. He told them everything. The complaints, the women, Daniel Collins, the daughter in Austin. When he finished, the room was silent. So what's the play? Big Mike spoke first. He was the club's enforcer, 6'5", 300 pounds, hands like dinner plates. We can't just ride into a town and start a war with the sheriff's department. We're not starting anything, Jake said. We're finishing what they started. There are people in this town who've been waiting years for someone to help them. We're going to be that help. How? We do it right. We do it legal. We document everything. We find every victim, every complaint, every piece of evidence that proves what the Harlans have been doing, and then we hand it to someone who can actually do something about it. FBI, maybe, state police, attorney general, someone outside this county's jurisdiction. Jake looked around the room. But first we need to know what we're dealing with. That means talking to people, building trust, showing this town that they're not alone anymore. Padre, the club's chaplain, a former Navy corpsman who'd found God in a VA hospital, raised his hand. What about the woman Margaret? She's our priority. Harlan's already targeted her once. He'll do it again. Jake pulled out his phone, checked the message Margaret had sent that morning. 3 words. He drove past, twice. We put someone on her, round the clock. She doesn't go anywhere alone until this is over. And Harlan, we don't touch him, not yet. We let him make mistakes. Men like him can't help themselves. The more pressure we put on, the sloppier he'll get. And when he slips... Jake's eyes hardened. We'll be there to catch him. The next morning, Jake rode to Austin alone. Sarah Collins lived in a small apartment near the hospital where she worked. When she opened the door, Jake saw a woman who'd spent half her life carrying a weight too heavy for one person. Mr. Morrison, just Jake. She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was neat, sparse, the kind of place that belonged to someone who'd learned not to get attached to things. Thank you for coming, she said. I know it's a lot to ask. You haven't asked for anything yet. Sarah sat down on the edge of her couch. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white. My father was a good man. He worked in the county assessor's office for 15 years. He knew everything about every property deal in Cedar Falls. She looked up at Jake. And he knew what the Harlans were doing. The fraud. The intimidation. The way they'd force people to sell their land for pennies, then flip it for millions. He was going to testify. He had documents. Proof. Enough to put Roy Harlan away for 20 years. Her voice cracked. 2 weeks before the trial, Victor came to our house. I was 7. I remember hiding in my closet listening to them argue. Victor told my father that if he testified, something bad would happen. My father told him to get out. And 2 weeks later, they said he shot himself, in our garage, while I was at school. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but her voice stayed steady. My father didn't own a gun, Jake. He hated guns. And the angle of the wound. The medical examiner said it was consistent with suicide, but I've spent 15 years as a nurse. I've seen gunshot wounds. That angle was wrong. Jake leaned forward. You said you have something. Proof. Sarah wiped her eyes, stood up, walked to her bedroom, and returned with a small digital recorder, the kind reporters used before smartphones took over. 5 years ago, I went back to Cedar Falls. I needed to know. I needed to hear him say it, and she held up the recorder. Victor Harlan was at a bar, drunk, alone. I sat down next to him, pretended I didn't know who he was. Let him buy me drinks. Let him talk. And he talked about my father, called him a problem that solved itself, laughed about it. Her hand trembled. And then he said he wished he could have seen my father's face when he realized what was happening. That it was the best moment of his career. Jake stared at the recorder. He confessed. Not directly. Not in words that would hold up in court. But it's enough. It's enough to prove he was involved. She pressed the recorder into Jake's hands. I've been carrying this for 5 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Everyone I've talked to, lawyers, journalists, even the state police, they all say the same thing. The Harlans are too powerful. No one wants to touch them. I'm not everyone. I know. That's why I'm giving this to you. Sarah grabbed his arm. But you need to understand something. Victor Harlan is dangerous. He's killed before and he'll kill again. If he finds out you have this, he won't. You can't promise that. Jake stood up, put the recorder in his inside pocket, close to his heart. Sarah, I've been fighting men like Victor Harlan my whole life. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, in places where the rules didn't exist, and the only law was who was willing to go further. He met her eyes. I'm willing to go further, and I won't stop until your father gets justice. For the first time since he'd arrived, Sarah smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. My father would have liked you. I wish I could have known him. Jake rode back to Cedar Falls with the recorder burning a hole in his pocket. He was 20 miles outside of town when his phone rang. Tommy's number. Jake, we got a problem. What happened? Harlan made a move. He went to the diner while you were gone. Served Margaret with a closure notice. Health code violations. She's got 72 hours to fix them, or they shut her down. Jake's hands tightened on the handlebars. What violations? Everything. Refrigeration temperatures, fire exits, food storage. Half of it's fabricated, the other half is stuff that would take weeks to fix. Where's Margaret now? At the diner. She's a mess, Jake. Rosa called us. Said Margaret's been staring at the notice for 2 hours. Won't eat, won't talk, won't do anything. Jake pushed the bike harder. The engine screamed beneath him. I'm 15 minutes out. Don't let anyone near her until I get there. He made it in 10. Margaret was sitting in the same booth where she'd fallen 3 days ago. The closure notice was spread out on the table in front of her 3 pages of violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. He's going to win, she said without looking up. He's finally going to win. Jake slid into the booth across from her. No, he's not. You don't understand. These violations, some of them are real. Small things I've been meaning to fix. But I don't have the money. I don't have the time. She finally looked at him, and Jake saw something he hadn't seen before. Defeat. Maybe I should just sell. Maybe I should just give him what he wants and walk away. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. Jake reached across the table, took her hand. Margaret, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. This diner, these violations, this is what he does. He finds your breaking point, and he pushes until you snap. But here's what he doesn't know: you're not alone anymore. You have me, you have my brothers, and you have something else. What? Jake pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. While I was gone, Tommy and the boys talked to some people in town, other business owners, other victims, people who've been too scared to speak up. He scrolled through the messages. Elena Rodriguez. She wants to testify about the fire that destroyed her flower shop. Samuel Thompson, the veteran, Harlan tried to frame. He's willing to go on record. Pastor Mitchell says his whole congregation is ready to stand behind you. Margaret stared at the messages. Her hand was shaking. They'd do that for me. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves, for their families, for this town. Jake squeezed her hand. You lit the match, Margaret. When you stood up to Harlan that morning, when you refused to back down, you showed them it was possible. Now they're ready to burn the whole thing to the ground. But the violations, we'll fix them, every single one. I've got 13 brothers who've built bases in war zones. You think we can't handle a few refrigerators and fire exits? He smiled. By tomorrow night, this diner will pass any inspection they throw at it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of defeat. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing all this? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph worn at the edges, creased from years of carrying. He set it on the table between them. A young woman smiled up from the picture. Dark hair, bright eyes, her father's stubborn chin. Her name was Emily, my daughter. Jake's voice was steady, but something underneath it cracked. 12 years ago, she married a man who seemed perfect, charming, successful. Everyone loved him. By the time she realized what he really was, it was too late. Margaret looked at the photograph, at the young woman who would never grow old. She called me for help. I was overseas, couldn't get back in time. She called the police. They said it was a domestic matter. She called again. They said they'd send someone. They never did. Jake took the photograph back, held it for a moment before returning it to his pocket. By the time I got home, she was gone, and her husband was walking free. Jake. I couldn't save her, Margaret. I've spent 12 years living with that. But I can save you. I can save this town. And maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe that's what all of it was for. Margaret reached across the table and took both of his hands in hers. Then let's save it together. The next 72 hours were chaos. Jake's brothers worked around the clock. Big Mike hauled refrigerators while Tommy rewired the fire alarm system. Padre organized volunteers from Pastor Mitchell's congregation. Even old Pete showed up, 78 years old, bad knees, but still able to swing a hammer. Word spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. The bikers were helping Margaret. The bikers were standing up to the Harlans. One by one, people who'd been afraid their whole lives started showing up at the diner. They brought food. They brought tools. They brought stories. Elena Rodriguez came on the second day. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, tears streaming down her face before she finally spoke. I ran once, she said. I won't run again. Samuel Thompson came that afternoon. He shook Jake's hand with a grip that said everything words couldn't. I served this country for 30 years. I'm not going to let some punk with a badge make me a coward in my own hometown. By the third day, the diner was ready. Every violation fixed. Every code met. Every weapon Harlan had tried to use against Margaret turned into evidence of his corruption. But Jake knew it wasn't over. It was barely beginning. The morning of the deadline, Jake got another call from Marcus. "We've got a problem." "What now?" "I did some more digging into Daniel Collins's death. The medical examiner who ruled it a suicide, he retired 6 months later, moved to Florida. House on the beach, new car, no debt." Marcus paused. That's a lot of lifestyle for a county medical examiner's salary. He was paid off. That's not the problem. The problem is that I found the original autopsy photos, the ones that were sealed after the case was closed. And the angle of the gunshot wound. It wasn't consistent with suicide at all. It was consistent with execution. Someone stood behind Daniel Collins, put a gun to his head, and pulled the trigger. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "Are you telling me we can prove Victor Harlan committed murder? I'm telling you we can prove someone committed murder, and that's enough for the FBI to take a serious look." Marcus took a deep breath. "Jake, I've got contacts, good ones. People who've been waiting for a case like this. I can make some calls." "Do it." "There's one more thing." "What?" "If the FBI opens an investigation, Victor Harlan is going to know. And when he knows, he's going to get desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." Jake looked out the window of the motel room. Across the street, he could see Margaret's diner. The lights were on. The open sign was glowing. People were lined up outside, more customers than she'd had in years. "Let him get desperate," Jake said. "Let him show the whole world who he really is." He hung up the phone and walked outside. The sun was setting over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. His brothers were gathered by their bikes, waiting. "It's time," Tommy asked. "Almost." Jake looked at each of them, at the men who'd followed him across oceans and battlefields, at the brothers who'd never let him down. "The FBI is going to open an investigation. When they do, Harlan is going to come at us with everything he has. It's going to get ugly before it gets better." "We've seen ugly," Big Mike said. "Ugly doesn't scare us." "I know." Jake nodded slowly. "But this is different. This isn't a war we can win with guns. This is a war we win with truth, with patience, with showing this town that there's another way to live. And if Harlan doesn't play by those rules," Jake's eyes went cold, "then we remind him that we know other rules too." That night, while Cedar Falls slept, a black sedan pulled up outside the motel. 2 figures in dark suits stepped out. FBI Special Agent Patricia Vance knocked on Jake's door at exactly midnight. "Mr. Morrison, we need to talk." Jake opened the door and found himself face to face with a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. FBI Special Agent Patricia Vance was in her late 40s, sharp-featured with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Morrison." "I wasn't hiding. No." She almost smiled. "You were making noise. A lot of noise. That's actually why I'm here." Jake stepped aside to let her in. The second agent, younger, nervous, clearly junior, followed behind. "This is Agent Torres," Vance said. "He's been working the Harlan case for 3 years." 3 years. The FBI doesn't move fast, Mr. Morrison. We move thorough." Vance sat down on the edge of the bed, uninvited, but clearly not asking permission. "We've been building a case against the Harlan family since 2021. Corruption, civil rights violations, fraud, obstruction of justice. The problem is evidence. Every witness we've found has either disappeared, recanted, or turned up dead." Jake thought of Daniel Collins, of the execution-style gunshot wound, of Sarah's recorder burning a hole in his pocket. And now you've done something we couldn't. You've given these people hope. In the past week, we've received 11 new complaints against Victor Harlan. 11. In 3 years, we got 6 total. Vance leaned forward. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Morrison, keep doing it. I'm not doing anything except helping a friend. Margaret Chen, the woman he assaulted at the diner. Vance nodded. We know about her. We know about the closure notice. We know about the 72-hour miracle your club pulled off. Well, she paused. We also know about Sarah Collins. Jake's expression didn't change, but something in his chest tightened. She contacted us yesterday, Vance continued. Told us about your meeting. Told us about the recording. She held out her hand. I need to hear it. Jake didn't move. How do I know you're not on Harlan's payroll? Half the law enforcement in this county is. You don't, but I'm going to tell you something that might help. Vance's voice dropped. My sister lived in Cedar Falls 15 years ago. She owned a small boutique on Main Street. Roy Harlan wanted the property. She refused to sell. What happened to her? She's in a wheelchair now. Hit-and-run driver. Never caught. Vance's jaw tightened. I've spent 15 years waiting for a chance to bring these people down. You're that chance, Mr. Morrison. Don't waste it. Jake studied her face, looked for lies, for deception, for any sign that this was another trap. He found nothing but the same cold fury he saw in his own mirror every morning. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the recorder, handed it over. Vance pressed play. Victor Harlan's voice filled the room, slurred, drunk laughing about a man he'd murdered, calling Daniel Collins a problem that solved itself, wishing he could have seen the fear in his eyes. When it ended, Vance's hands were shaking. This isn't enough for court, she said quietly. But it's enough to open a federal investigation. It's enough to start subpoenaing records. It's enough to put pressure on the people who've been covering for him. And Victor, he's going to know something's coming. Men like him always do. They can smell when the walls start closing in. Vance stood up. That's why I need to ask you something, Mr. Morrison. Something dangerous. I'm listening. We need Victor Harlan on tape, not drunk rambling, actual confession, evidence that will hold up in court, and we need someone he'll talk to, someone he feels safe threatening. She paused. Someone like Margaret Chen. Jake's blood went cold. Absolutely not. Mr. Morrison, you want to put a wire on a woman Victor Harlan has already assaulted once, a woman he's been terrorizing for 2 years. You want to send her into a room alone with a man who executed his last witness. I want to end this. Vance's voice was steel. I want Victor Harlan in prison for the rest of his life. I want his uncle right beside him. And I want every person in that town to know that the law finally works for them, too. She stepped closer. Margaret Chen is the key. He's obsessed with her. He'll talk to her in ways he won't talk to anyone else. And if we don't get that confession, find another way. There is no other way. The room fell silent. Torres shifted uncomfortably by the door. Outside, the night pressed against the windows like a living thing. Let me talk to her, Jake said finally. If she agrees, and only if she agrees, we'll discuss terms. That's all I ask. Vance handed him a card. Call me when you have an answer. And Mr. Morrison, time is running out. Harlan knows something's happening. He's already starting to cover his tracks. If we don't move soon, we might not get another chance. She left without another word. Jake stood alone in the motel room, Vance's card in his hand, the weight of the decision crushing his chest. He couldn't ask Margaret to do this, but he knew with terrible certainty that she would volunteer anyway. He was right. I'll do it. Margaret said the words before Jake finished explaining. They were sitting in the empty diner, just the two of them. 3 a.m., the closed sign, dark in the window. "Margaret, you don't understand what you're agreeing to." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Victor Harlan has controlled my life for 2 years. He's made me afraid to walk to my own car. He's made me flinch every time a door opens. He's made me a prisoner in my own town." She looked at Jake with eyes that had stopped being afraid. "If wearing a wire can end that not just for me, but for everyone he's hurt, then yes, I'll do it. He could kill you. He could kill me tomorrow anyway. Or the next day. Or the day after that." Margaret reached across the table and took Jake's hand. "You told me I wasn't alone anymore. You told me I had you. Were you lying? Of course not. Then trust me. Trust that I can do this." She squeezed his hand. "You've spent your whole life protecting people, Jake. Let me protect myself this time. Let me fight back." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in a room somewhere safe and handle this himself. But he looked at her face, at the determination he'd seen in combat veterans and Marines who'd faced impossible odds, and he knew he couldn't take this from her. "If anything goes wrong, anything at all, you run. You don't try to be brave. You don't try to get one more piece of evidence. You run and you let me handle the rest." "I understand." "Promise me, Margaret." She held his gaze. "I promise." Jake called Vance at 4 a.m. "She's in." The next week was a hurricane. Word spread through the veteran motorcycle community like fire through dry grass. Brothers of the Road had found a fight worth fighting. Within 3 days, riders started arriving from across Texas. Then from Oklahoma. Then from Louisiana, New Mexico, Arizona. By the end of the week, 217 motorcycles lined the streets of Cedar Falls. The town had never seen anything like it. They came with supplies, with tools, with money they'd collected at charity runs across the Southwest. They came with stories of their own communities. They'd helped bullies, they'd faced battles they'd won. And they came with cameras. Every brother wore a body camera. Every bike had a dash cam. Every moment of every day was documented, recorded, preserved. "Let him try something," Tommy said, reviewing the footage from the previous day's patrol. "Let him plant evidence. Let him make false arrests. We'll have it all on tape." The media arrived on day 4. It started with a local reporter, a young woman named Jessica Reyes from the Austin Chronicle, chasing a tip about bikers versus corrupt cops. Within hours of her first article going live, the story exploded. Veteran bikers stand up to small-town corruption. Cedar Falls, the town that fought back. Motorcycle club takes on sheriff's department and wins. The national outlets picked it up next. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Everyone wanted the story. Everyone wanted to interview Jake, Margaret, the brothers, who'd risked everything for strangers. Jake refused every request. "This isn't about us," he told Tommy. "This is about them. The people of this town. The victims who've been silenced for years. Let them tell their stories." And they did. Elena Rodriguez appeared on local news tears streaming down her face, describing how Victor Harlan had burned down her flower shop. Samuel Thompson stood tall in his army dress uniform and told the world how he'd been framed for drug possession. Pastor Mitchell opened his church's records, showing 3 years of fabricated code violations designed to force them out. One by one, the people of Cedar Falls found their voices, and Victor Harlan started to crack. "You need to do something." Victor was pacing again, wearing a groove in his uncle's office floor. "Did you see the news? They're calling us corrupt. They're calling us criminals. My face is everywhere." Roy Harlan sat behind his desk watching his nephew unravel. Calm down. Calm down, there are 200 bikers in this town. 200, and the FBI has been sniffing around. Someone told me they saw federal plates at the motor lodge. What if they're building a case? What if… I said calm down. Roy's voice cut through Victor's panic like a knife. The younger man stopped pacing, looked at his uncle with something close to fear. We've been through worse, Roy said slowly. We'll get through this too, but not by panicking, not by making mistakes. Then what do we do? Roy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. We remind them who runs this town. We remind them what happens to people who challenge us. He stood up. That diner, the Chen woman, she's the symbol of all this, isn't she? The brave little waitress who stood up to the big bad deputy. Yeah. Then we take her down. Not with violence, we're past that now. Too many cameras, too much attention. Roy's eyes narrowed. We take her down with evidence. Real evidence. Something that proves she's been lying about everything. Something that makes her look like a criminal instead of a victim. How? Roy smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd been destroying lives for 40 years. I have some friends at the DEA. They owe me favors. Large favors. He picked up his phone. By tomorrow morning, Margaret Chen will be a drug dealer, and all those bikers, they'll be her suppliers. You're going to plant drugs. I'm going to save this family. Roy dialed a number. Whatever it takes. The raid came at dawn. Jake was at the motor lodge when his phone exploded with messages. Tommy, Big Mike, Padre, all saying the same thing, deputies at the diner. Dogs. A full search team. He was on his bike in seconds. By the time he arrived, half the town had gathered outside Rosie's diner. Deputies in tactical gear. K9 units straining at their leashes. Victor Harlan standing in the middle of it all, smiling like Christmas had come early. What the hell is going on? Jake pushed through the crowd. Stay back, civilian. A deputy put a hand on Jake's chest. This is a crime scene. On what grounds? Anonymous tip. Drug trafficking. We're executing a search warrant. The deputy's eyes were flat, unreadable. If you interfere, you'll be arrested. Jake's blood boiled. He could see Margaret through the diner window, surrounded by deputies, her face white with terror. You're making a mistake. The only mistake here was yours. Victor Harlan stepped forward close enough for Jake to smell the coffee on his breath. You should have left when you had the chance, old man. Now it's too late. You won't find anything. We'll see about that. Jake watched helplessly as the search team tore through the diner. They pulled apart booths, emptied cabinets, ripped open boxes in the storage room. 20 minutes later, a deputy emerged holding a clear plastic bag. White powder. Found it. The deputy held up the bag like a trophy. Hidden in the flour storage, at least a kilo, maybe more. Victor's smile widened. Well, well, looks like our brave little waitress isn't so innocent after all. The crowd murmured. Some people, the ones who'd known Margaret for years, looked stunned, disbelieving. Others just looked scared. Margaret was led out in handcuffs. Jake. She reached for him as they pushed her toward a patrol car. Jake, this isn't… I know. He tried to get to her, but 3 deputies blocked his path. Margaret, don't say anything. Not a word until you have a lawyer. Do you understand? But I didn't do anything. I know, trust me, just stay quiet. The patrol car door slammed shut. Through the window, Jake could see Margaret's face, pale, tear-streaked, terrified. Victor Harlan walked over. Stood beside Jake. Close enough to whisper. Game over, Morrison. Your little crusade is finished. By tomorrow, she'll be charged with trafficking. By next week, she'll be in federal custody. and by next month everyone will have forgotten that Cedar Falls ever had a problem. But Jake didn't move, didn't speak. Nothing to say? Victor laughed. I thought so. You're all the same, you heroes. Big talk, big ideas, but when it really counts, you've got nothing. Jake turned his head slowly, met Victor's eyes. You forgot something. What's that? You planted drugs in a diner that's been under 24-hour surveillance for 2 weeks. Victor's smile faltered. Every camera, every angle, every minute of every day. Jake's voice was soft, almost gentle. Including the hour between 2 and 3 a.m. last night when a black sedan with county plates pulled up to the back entrance, when 2 men in masks entered the storage room, when they spent exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds hiding something in the flour container. Victor's face went white. We have the footage, Victor. All of it. High definition. Clear enough to identify faces, license plates, everything. Jake leaned closer. And in about 30 seconds it's going to be on every news station in the state. On cue, Jake's phone buzzed. A message from Tommy. It's live. Across the street, someone's car radio crackled to life. A news anchor's voice, urgent and excited. Breaking news out of Cedar Falls, Texas, where video evidence appears to show members of the sheriff's department planting drugs at a local diner. Victor spun around. Deputies were pulling out their phones, staring at screens in horror. The crowd's murmurs turned to angry shouts. You! Victor turned back to Jake, his face twisted with rage. You planned this. You knew I knew you couldn't help yourself. Jake stood his ground. That's the thing about bullies, Victor. You're predictable. You always go for the easy target. You always take the obvious shot. And you never ever think about the consequences. I'll kill you. No, you won't. Because right now there are 200 witnesses, 50 cameras, and... Jake pointed at the black SUV pulling up to the curb. About 6 FBI agents who just watched you threaten a civilian. Victor turned. Patricia Vance stepped out of the SUV, badge in hand. Victor Harlan, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. She nodded to the agents behind her. Additional charges pending. You can't do this. Your uncle is being arrested right now. Vance smiled coldly. We executed warrants simultaneously. By the time this is over, your entire family is going to need a very good lawyer. Several, actually. Victor lunged. He didn't get far. 2 FBI agents had him on the ground before he took 3 steps. His face pressed into the asphalt, his arms wrenched behind his back. Let me go. This is my town. You can't. It's not your town anymore. Vance crouched down beside him. It never was. They loaded him into a federal vehicle. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the man who'd terrorized them for 15 years was driven away like any other criminal. Margaret was released within the hour. She ran to Jake the moment the handcuffs came off, threw her arms around him, held on like she'd never let go. You knew, she sobbed into his chest. You knew they were going to plant evidence. I suspected. Tommy set up extra cameras just in case. Jake held her gently, carefully, like something precious. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I should have warned you. You couldn't. If I'd known, I might have acted differently, given something away. She pulled back, looked up at him with wet eyes. You trusted me to be strong enough to handle it. I knew you were strong enough. I've known since the moment I met you. Around them, the crowd was starting to celebrate. People were hugging, crying, laughing. Elena Rodriguez was on her knees, praying. Samuel Thompson was shaking hands with anyone who got close enough. But Jake knew it wasn't over. His phone rang. Vance. We got Roy Harlan at his office. He tried to shred documents, but we were faster." Her voice was tight with excitement. "Jake, you won't believe what we found. Financial records going back 20 years. Property deals. Bribery payments. Evidence of at least 3 other deaths that were ruled accidents or suicides. And Victor, he's asking for a lawyer. But here's the thing, he's scared Jake. Really scared. Men like that, when they realize the game is over, they start talking. They start making deals. You think he'll flip on his uncle? I think he'll flip on anyone who might reduce his sentence." Vance paused. "But we still need the confession. The direct admission about Daniel Collins. Without that, we might not be able to prove murder." Jake looked at Margaret. At the woman who'd agreed to wear a wire. Who'd been willing to face her abuser alone. The plan still stands, if she's still willing. Jake pulled the phone away from his ear. "Margaret, the FBI still wants you to meet with Victor. Get him to confess. He's in custody. They'll arrange a meeting, controlled environment, agents outside. But you'd be alone with him, talking about the worst thing he's ever done." Jake's voice was heavy. "You don't have to do this. We've already won. He's going to prison either way." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the diner, her diner still standing despite everything. She looked at the crowd, her neighbors finally free. She looked at Jake, the stranger who'd become something more. "Sarah Collins waited 8 years for justice," she said quietly. "Her father deserves more than a few years for corruption charges. He deserves the truth." "Margaret, set up the meeting." Her voice was steel. "I'll get your confession." The meeting was set for Thursday night. Victor Harlan had been in federal custody for 72 hours. His lawyer, a high-priced attorney from Dallas, who'd defended dirty politicians and crooked CEOs, had negotiated a private consultation with a potential witness. The FBI agreed on one condition. They chose the location. They chose the diner. "You're sure about this?" Jake asked for the 100th time. They were standing in the kitchen, just the two of them, while Vance's team swept the building for the 3rd time that day. Margaret held up the tiny microphone. It was smaller than a button, designed to be invisible against her skin. "I'm sure. He's going to be desperate, cornered. Men like that." "Jake," she touched his arm. "I've been afraid of Victor Harlan for 2 years. I've had nightmares about his face, his voice, the way he looked at me like I was nothing. But right now, I'm not afraid." She tucked the microphone into place. "I'm angry. Anger makes people careless. No, fear makes people careless. Anger makes them focused." She met his eyes. "I know what I need to get him to say. I know how to push his buttons. And I know that when it's over, Sarah Collins will finally have justice for her father." Jake wanted to argue. Wanted to pull her out of this lock, her somewhere safe handle Victor himself. But he'd made a promise to trust her, to let her fight her own battles. He just hadn't realized how hard keeping that promise would be. The moment anything feels wrong, you use the safe word. "Rosie." You say that name and we come through the door. No hesitation, no waiting. Understand? I understand. And if he touches you, he won't get the chance. Vance appeared in the doorway. "We're ready. Victor's transport is 5 minutes out." Margaret straightened her apron, smoothed her hair. When she turned back to Jake, she looked like any other waitress preparing for the evening shift. But her eyes told a different story. "See you on the other side," she said. Jake couldn't speak. He just nodded and watched her walk away. Victor Harlan looked different in handcuffs. The swagger was gone. The smirk had faded into something harder, more desperate. 3 days in federal custody had stripped away the veneer of invincibility he'd worn for 15 years. But his eyes were still dangerous. "Nice place," he said, as the agents removed his restraints. Lot of memories here. Margaret stood behind the counter exactly where she'd been standing the day he knocked her down. Her hands were steady on the coffee pot. Sit anywhere you like. Victor chose the corner booth, the same one she'd crashed into, the same one that still had a small crack in the upholstery from her fall. Your lawyer said you wanted to talk. My lawyer says a lot of things. Victor leaned back, studying her. I wanted to see you before everything goes sideways. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. He gestured at the empty diner. This little performance, the cameras, the bikers, the FBI. You think you've won something. You think you've beaten me. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can change their minds. Cases can fall apart. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You'd be surprised how many sure things turn into nothing. Margaret poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, kept the other for herself. Is that why you wanted to meet to threaten me? I don't threaten Margaret, I explain. There's a difference. He wrapped his hands around the mug, but didn't drink. You've started something you can't finish. That biker Morrison, he thinks he's some kind of hero. But heroes don't last in places like this. They burn out. They give up. They move on to the next crusade and forget all about the people they left behind. Jake's not like that. They're all like that. Trust me. Victor's voice softened, almost gentle. I've been doing this a long time, Margaret. I've seen reformers come and go. Journalists, activists, politicians, they all show up with big ideas and bigger promises. And you know what happens? Nothing. Because the system always wins. Because people like me have built something that can't be torn down by one man with a motorcycle and a messiah complex. Margaret sat down across from him. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her face calm. You sound scared. Victor's jaw tightened. I'm not scared. You are. I can hear it in your voice. All this talk about systems and inevitability, it's not confidence. It's desperation. She leaned forward. You know what I think, Victor? I think you're finally realizing that you're not untouchable. That all those years of hurting people, destroying lives, taking whatever you wanted, it's finally catching up to you. Careful? Or what? You'll knock me down again, push me into a booth while everyone watches. She shook her head. That's the only way you know how to deal with problems, isn't it? Violence, intimidation, force. But those tools don't work anymore. Not with the whole world watching. Victor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Colder. Harder. You want to know something, Margaret? Something I've never told anyone. Margaret's pulse quickened. This was it. Tell me. 8 years ago, there was a man, Daniel Collins. He worked for the county assessor. Smart guy. Too smart for his own good. Victor's eyes never left hers. He found things he shouldn't have found. Documents, records, proof that my family had been adjusting property values for our benefit. What happened to him? He was going to testify. Federal case. Would have brought down everything we'd built over 3 generations. Victor picked up his coffee. Finally took a sip. So we had to make a decision. Margaret's hand trembled beneath the table. What kind of decision? The only kind that matters. The permanent kind. Are you saying you killed him? Victor smiled. I'm saying problems have solutions. And Daniel Collins stopped being a problem. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. Margaret's heart sank. He was close, so close, but not close enough. She needed more, needed him to say the words directly. Sarah Collins, she said quietly. His daughter. She's been waiting 8 years to know what really happened. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. You've been talking to her. She has a recording, Victor. You drunk at a bar talking about her father, calling him a problem that solved itself. The color drained from Victor's face. That recording is how the FBI got involved. That recording is why you're sitting here in handcuffs instead of behind your desk. Margaret's voice hardened. But it's not enough. Not for murder charges. Not for real justice. Victor was breathing faster now. His hands had tightened around the coffee mug until his knuckles went white. What do you want? The truth, all of it. What really happened to Daniel Collins? And if I tell you, then maybe Sarah can finally move on. Maybe this town can finally heal. Margaret reached across the table, almost touched his hand. You're going to prison either way, Victor. For corruption, for planting evidence for everything you've done. But murder carries a different weight. You know that. And carrying that weight alone for the rest of your life, never telling anyone what really happened. She shook her head. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. Victor stared at her. For a moment, Margaret thought she saw something human behind those cold eyes, something broken and tired and ready to confess. Then his gaze dropped to her chest, to the spot where her collar met her skin, where a tiny wire was just barely visible in the dim light. His hand shot across the table and grabbed her wrist. You're wearing a wire. Margaret's blood turned to ice. Victor, you're wearing a goddamn wire. He yanked her forward, twisting her arm until she cried out. His other hand tore at her collar, ripping the fabric, exposing the microphone taped to her skin. FBI, we're coming in, Vance's voice boomed from outside. But Victor was faster. He was out of the booth before Margaret could scream, one arm wrapped around her throat, the other holding something cold and metallic against her temple. A gun. Where had he gotten a gun? Stay back! Victor's voice echoed through the empty diner. Anyone comes through that door, she dies. The front door burst open. Jake rushed in first, followed by Vance and 3 agents with weapons drawn. Let her go, Victor. Vance's voice was steady, professional. There's no way out of this. There's always a way out. Victor pressed the gun harder against Margaret's head. She whimpered, tears streaming down her face. You just have to be willing to take it. Jake stepped forward, slowly. His hands were empty, raised where Victor could see them. Victor, look at me. Stay back, Morrison. I'm not moving. I'm just talking. Jake's voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who'd negotiated with insurgents, with hostage takers, with people who had nothing left to lose. You've got federal agents outside. Snipers probably setting up right now. Every second you hold that gun to her head, you're making this worse. It can't get worse, Victor's voice cracked. I'm done. You understand. This whole thing, my career, my family, everything I've built, it's gone. Because of you. Because of her. It's not gone. Not yet. Jake took another step. You cooperate now, you might still see daylight again someday. You hurt her, and that's over. It's federal death row, Victor. Is that really how you want this to end? Victor laughed. The sound was wild, unhinged. You think I'm afraid of death? I've been dead for years, Morrison. Walking around wearing the badge, pretending to be something I'm not. The only time I ever felt alive was when I had power, when people looked at me and saw something to fear. He pressed his cheek against Margaret's hair. She was the first one who didn't look away. Did you know that? The first one who looked me in the eye and refused to break. Then don't break her now. Jake's voice dropped. Whatever you think you need to do, whatever ending you've imagined, she's not part of it. Let her go. Face this like a man. A man. Victor's arm tightened around Margaret's throat. You want to talk about being a man? You rode into my town like some kind of white knight, turned everyone against me, destroyed everything my family spent 3 generations building. And now you want to lecture me about manhood? I came here because a woman was hurt, because she needed help, and no one else would give it. That's not being a white knight, Victor. That's being human. Human. Victor spat the word. Humans are weak. Humans are prey. My father taught me that before I could walk. The only way to survive in this world is to be the predator, to take what you want before someone takes it from you. Your father was wrong. My father built an empire. Your father built a prison. And you've been trapped in it your whole life. Jake took another step. Close now. Close enough to see the sweat on Victor's forehead, the tremor in his hands. You know what I see when I look at you. I see a scared little boy who never learned another way, who was taught that strength means hurting people, that power means control. But that's not strength, Victor. That's fear. And I think you're tired of being afraid. Victor's gun hand was shaking now. Margaret could feel it against her temple, the metal vibrating with every tremor. You don't know anything about me. I know you've never had anyone stand up to you and not back down. I know that every victim you've made has reinforced the lie you tell yourself, that you're in control, that you're powerful, that you matter. Jake's eyes never wavered. But here's the truth, Victor. The truth you've been running from your whole life. You don't matter. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you've never done. You've never built anything, never created anything, never loved anything. And when you're gone, the only thing people will remember is their relief. Shut up. The only legacy you'll leave is the damage you've caused. And even that will fade. Because people heal, Victor. They move on. They forget the names of the men who hurt them and remember the names of the people who saved them. I said shut up. Margaret will rebuild her diner. This town will rebuild its trust. Sarah Collins will finally get closure. And you'll be a footnote. A cautionary tale, nothing more. Victor screamed. The gun swung away from Margaret's head, arcing toward Jake. Jake moved. 40 years of combat training compressed into a single moment. His hand closed around Victor's wrist, twisting, redirecting. The gun fired a deafening crack that echoed through the diner, but the bullet buried itself in the ceiling. Margaret fell. Agents swarmed, and Jake stood face to face with Victor Harlan, his hand still locked around the man's wrist, their eyes inches apart. It's over, Jake said quietly. It's finally over. Victor sagged. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. His legs gave way, and Jake caught him, held him up when every instinct screamed to let him fall. Why? Victor whispered. Why would you catch me? Because that's the difference between us. Jake lowered him gently to the floor as agents moved in with handcuffs. You see enemies. I see people, even the ones who don't deserve it. Vance was at Margaret's side, helping her up, checking for injuries. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine. Margaret's eyes found Jake across the room. Jake. He was there in 3 steps, wrapped his arms around her, held her while she shook while the adrenaline drained away, and the reality of what had almost happened crashed over her like a wave. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. I've got you. He was going to kill me. He had a gun. Where did he? Hidden in his boot. His lawyer missed it during transport. Jake's voice was tight with fury. Someone's going to answer for that. But I didn't get it. The confession. He didn't say the words, actually. Vance appeared beside them, phone in hand. He said enough. Problems have solutions. Daniel Collins stopped being a problem. Combined with Sarah's recording and the forensic evidence from the autopsy photos, we can make a case. For murder, for conspiracy to commit murder. Maybe murder too, depending on how the DA wants to play it. Vance put her hand on Margaret's shoulder. You did good. Better than good. You stayed calm under pressure, kept him talking, gave us everything we needed. Margaret started to respond, but movement caught her eye. Victor, being led toward the door in handcuffs, had stopped, was looking back at her. Margaret. She tensed. Jake stepped between them. Let him speak, she said quietly. I want to hear it. Jake moved aside. Margaret met Victor's eyes. You were right, Victor said. His voice was hollow, empty. About everything. About the fear, the weakness, all of it. He swallowed hard. I killed Daniel Collins. Put the gun to the back of his head and pulled the trigger. Made it look like suicide. I've carried it for 8 years and it's been eating me alive. The room went silent. Even the agents stopped moving. Tell that to Sarah, Margaret said. She deserves to hear it from you. Victor nodded slowly. Then the agents led him away, and the door closed behind him, and Margaret Chen finally let herself cry. An hour later, Jake found himself standing outside the diner, alone. The crisis was over. Victor was in custody properly this time with extra security and no hidden weapons. Roy Harlan was singing like a canary, giving up names and dates and details that would bring down half the corrupt officials in 3 counties. The FBI had enough evidence to build cases for months, but Jake felt no triumph, no satisfaction. He thought about Emily, his daughter, the calls for help that went unanswered, the police who did nothing, the guilt he'd carried for 12 years. He'd come to Cedar Falls to save Margaret, to save this town. But standing here now, watching the emergency lights fade into the distance, he realized the truth. He'd been trying to save himself. Jake. Margaret stood in the doorway. Her collar was still torn, her hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. But she was alive. She was standing. And she was looking at him with something that made his chest ache. You should rest, he said. It's been a long night. I can't sleep. Not yet. She walked over to stand beside him. What are you thinking about? My daughter. Emily. Margaret nodded. You told me about her, about what happened. I failed her. When she needed me most, I wasn't there. Jake's voice was rough. I've spent 12 years trying to make up for that, helping people fighting battles, trying to balance the scales. But they never balance, Margaret. The guilt never goes away. Maybe it's not supposed to. He looked at her. Maybe we don't get to be free of the things we've lost, she said softly. Maybe we just learn to carry them differently, to let them shape us instead of break us. She took his hand. You saved me tonight. You saved this whole town. That doesn't erase Emily, and it shouldn't. But it matters, Jake. It counts for something. Does it? It counts for everything. They stood together in the darkness, 2 broken people who'd somehow found each other. Behind them, the diner's lights glowed warm and steady. Ahead of them, the future stretched out, uncertain, unknowable, but no longer terrifying. Jake squeezed her hand. What now? He asked. Margaret smiled. It was tired and fragile and real. Now we rebuild. Together. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life. Then another. Then a dozen more. Jake's brothers waiting for orders. Waiting to see what came next. Jake Morrison had spent his whole life running toward trouble. Maybe it was time to find out what happened when he finally stopped running. The trials began 6 weeks later. Federal courthouses weren't built for drama. They were designed for process, for procedure, for the slow grinding machinery of justice that most people never saw. But on the morning Victor Harlan's trial began, the courthouse steps were packed with 300 people who'd driven from every corner of Texas to witness what was about to happen. Jake stood at the back of the courtroom. He'd worn his leather vest his brothers had insisted, but underneath it was a pressed white shirt. First time he'd worn one in years. Margaret sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table. She'd lost weight since that night at the diner. The fear had left marks that wouldn't fade easily. But her eyes were clear, and when she looked at Jake, she smiled. "All rise." Judge Catherine Monroe entered the courtroom. She was 72 years old, appointed to the federal bench by 3 different presidents and known throughout Texas as the one judge who couldn't be bought, threatened, or intimidated. The Harlans had tried all 3. They'd failed. "The United States versus Victor Raymond Harlan," the bailiff announced. "Charges include conspiracy to commit murder, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and corruption." Victor sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. His expensive lawyer had abandoned him 2 weeks ago, something about unpaid bills and conflicts of interest. The public defender beside him looked barely old enough to shave. "How does the defendant plead?" Victor stood. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his eyes found Margaret in the front row. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Spectators gasped and whispered. Even the judge looked surprised. "Order." Monroe banged her gavel. "Mr. Harlan, do you understand what you're saying? You're waiving your right to a trial." "I understand, Your Honor." "And you're entering this plea of your own free will without coercion or promises from the prosecution." "I am." Victor's voice was flat, empty. "I'm guilty of everything they've charged me with, and more. Things that aren't in the indictment. Things that will never be in any indictment because the evidence is gone or the witnesses are dead." He looked at the judge. "I've spent my whole life hurting people. I'm ready to stop." Margaret's hands were shaking. Jake moved through the crowd until he was standing behind her, his presence steady and warm. "The court accepts the defendant's plea," Judge Monroe said finally. "Sentencing will be scheduled for— I'd like to make a statement first." Monroe studied him. "That's highly irregular, Mr. Harlan." "I know, but there are people in this room who deserve to hear what I have to say. People I've wronged. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But I can give them the truth. After all these years, I can at least give them that." The judge looked at the prosecutor, who shrugged, looked at the defense attorney, who seemed as confused as everyone else. Finally, she nodded. "You have 5 minutes." Victor turned to face the gallery. 300 faces stared back at him, angry, hurt, waiting. "I killed Daniel Collins." The words dropped like stones into still water. 8 years ago, I went to his house with a gun. I told him if he testified against my family, I'd hurt his daughter. He refused to back down. So I shot him. Made it look like suicide." Victor's voice cracked. "His daughter was 7 years old. I let her grow up thinking her father abandoned her." In the gallery, a woman began to sob. Sarah Collins, who'd waited 8 years for this moment, who'd carried a recording and a broken heart halfway across Texas. "I destroyed Elena Rodriguez's flower shop because she refused to sell. I framed Samuel Thompson because he made me look weak. I terrorized Margaret Chen because my family wanted her property, and I wanted to feel powerful." Victor's hands were trembling. "I've hurt so many people I can't remember all their names. And the worst part, I told myself they deserved it, that I was protecting my family, that the ends justified the means." He looked at Jake. Then a stranger rode into town. A man who'd never met any of us. A man who had every reason to mind his own business and ride away. But he didn't. He stayed. he fought. And he showed this town that bullies only win when good people are too afraid to stand up. Victor turned back to the judge. I'm guilty, Your Honor, of everything, and I'm ready to pay for it. The sentencing came 3 hours later. Victor Raymond Harlan, you are hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. No one cheered. No one applauded. The weight of what had happened, what was still happening, was too heavy for celebration. But Margaret reached back and took Jake's hand. And that was enough. Roy Harlan's trial was shorter. Faced with the mountain of evidence his nephew had provided, the former sheriff folded within hours. He pleaded guilty to corruption conspiracy and accessory to murder. 22 years federal prison. The day after his sentencing, 3 more deputies were arrested, then 2 county commissioners, then the medical examiner who'd falsified Daniel Collins' autopsy, then a state representative who'd been taking bribes from the Harlan family for a decade. The dominoes kept falling. They're calling it the biggest corruption case in Texas history, Agent Vance told Jake over coffee. They were sitting in Margaret's diner, which had become something of a headquarters for the ongoing investigation. 23 arrests so far, probably another dozen coming. And after that, we rebuild, find honest people to fill the positions, make sure this never happens again. Vance shook her head. It's going to take years, maybe decades, but Cedar Falls will recover. Will you be part of that? Vance smiled. I put in for a transfer. They're creating a new task force to investigate institutional corruption in small towns across the state. Someone has to run it. Congratulations. Don't congratulate me yet. The job comes with a request. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. We want to hire consultants, people who understand these communities, people who can spot the warning signs before things get as bad as they did here. Jake looked at the folder. His name was printed on the front. You want me to work for the FBI? I want you to help us. Unofficially. No badge, no salary, no bureaucracy. Vance leaned forward. Just you and your brothers doing what you do best. Finding towns that need help. Being the catalyst that gets people to stand up. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the road, about the freedom of moving from place to place, never putting down roots, never staying long enough to get attached. Then he thought about Margaret, about the way she smiled when she poured his coffee, about the life he could have if he stopped running. Let me think about it. Take your time. The offer doesn't expire. Vance left. Jake sat alone with his coffee, watching the morning light filter through the windows of a diner that had become something like home. The special election was held on a Saturday. Cedar Falls had never seen turnout like this. Every registered voter, and quite a few who'd registered just for the occasion, showed up to cast their ballots for a new sheriff. There were 3 candidates: a state trooper from Austin who promised professional standards, a retired FBI agent who talked about institutional reform, and Samuel Thompson, the 72-year-old Army veteran who'd been framed by Victor Harlan 4 years ago. Samuel won by a landslide. I don't know what to say. He stood at the podium that night, overwhelmed by the cheering crowd. I spent 4 years as a suspect in my own community. 4 years watching people cross the street to avoid me. 4 years wondering if I'd ever get my reputation back. He looked at Jake, standing at the edge of the crowd with Margaret. Then a stranger came to town. He didn't know me, didn't know my story, but he believed me when no one else would. He fought for me when I was too tired to fight for myself. Samuel's voice broke. That's the kind of sheriff I want to be. Someone who believes people. Someone who fights for them. Someone who never forgets that this badge is a promise, not a privilege. The crowd erupted. People who'd been afraid their whole lives cheered until their throats were raw. People who'd given up hope found themselves believing again. Jake slipped away before the speeches ended. He'd never been comfortable with praise. Margaret found him outside, sitting on his motorcycle, looking up at the stars. Running away. Just getting some air. She sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Samuel asked me to thank you. For everything. He doesn't owe me anything. He won that election on his own merit. You really believe that? Jake was quiet for a moment. I believe that I lit a match. What happened after the fire, the change, all of it, that was you. That was this town. I just showed up at the right time. The right time? Margaret shook her head. You showed up at the worst time. The most dangerous time. When everyone else would have looked the other way. I've never been good at looking the other way. I know. She took his hand. That's why I'm asking you to stay. Jake's heart stuttered. Margaret, I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm not asking you to hang up your vest and become a different person. I'm asking you to let Cedar Falls be your home base, the place you come back to, the place where someone's waiting for you. I've never had a home base. Neither have I. Not since my husband died. Margaret's eyes were bright with tears. But I think I could have one now, if you wanted to build it with me. Jake looked at her. At this small, fierce woman who'd stood up to a monster. Who'd worn a wire into a room with a killer. Who'd rebuilt her life from ashes and helped an entire town do the same. I'm 61 years old, he said slowly. I've got bad knees, a titanium plate in my shoulder, and nightmares that wake me up at 3 a.m. I'm 58. I've got arthritis, a diner that barely breaks even, and I cry every time I see a photo of my husband. Margaret smiled through her tears. We're quite a pair. We are. Is that a yes? Jake lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. It's a yes. 1 year later. The sign above the diner had changed. Where Rosie's had hung for 40 years, a new name gleamed in the morning sun. Ironsides. Margaret had fought him on it. It's your diner, Jake had argued. It should have your name. It's our diner, she'd replied. And Ironsides sounds better. He'd lost that argument. He'd lost a lot of arguments in the past year, and he'd never been happier about losing in his life. The breakfast rush was just ending when the motorcycles appeared. 217 bikes, chrome gleaming engines, rumbling riders wearing leather vests with patches that told stories of service and sacrifice. The Brothers of the Road annual charity run, making their traditional stop in Cedar Falls. Jake walked outside to meet them. Tommy was in the lead, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Brother? They embraced years of friendship compressed into a single moment. Place looks good. Margaret's doing. I just washed dishes. Liar. Tommy looked at the diner, at the town, at the life Jake had built. You did good here, Ironside. Real good. We all did. The other brothers gathered around. Big Mike, Padre, 12 others who'd followed Jake into battle and stayed until the war was won. They'd dispersed afterward back to their own lives, their own families, their own roads. But once a year they came back. Once a year they remembered. Where's the lady of the house? Big Mike asked. Inside, cooking enough food to feed an army. Jake smiled. Which coincidentally is exactly what just showed up. The diner filled with laughter and stories, and the smell of bacon frying. Bikers who'd faced bullets and bombs now fought over the last piece of pie. Veterans who'd seen the worst of humanity now toasted to the best of it. Margaret worked the counter like she'd been born to it. She knew every brother's name, every dietary restriction, every story they loved to tell. She'd become the heart of something larger than herself, a community that stretched across state lines and bridged generations. "You look happy," Jake said, catching her between orders. "I am happy." She kissed him quickly. "Now stop distracting me. I've got 200 hungry bikers and 1 griddle." "Yes, ma'am." Jake found his way back outside. The morning was warm, the sky clear, the future stretching out like an open road. A car pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out, young, maybe 35, with dark hair and careful eyes. Sarah Collins. "Mr. Morrison." "Just Jake." "Jake." She walked over slowly. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but the anniversary, I wanted to thank you. Properly." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "My father's been gone for 9 years now. For 8 of those years I carried his death like a stone around my neck. I couldn't move forward. Couldn't let go. Couldn't do anything but wait for justice that never came. And now I'm free." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Victor Harlan is in prison. The truth is finally public record. And my father is finally at rest." Jake didn't speak. Some moments were too sacred for words. "I'm getting married next month," Sarah continued, "to a man my father never got to meet. A man who loves me despite all the broken pieces." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I'd like you to be there, you and Margaret, if you're willing." Jake took the envelope, felt the weight of it, not just paper and ink, but hope and healing, and the long, slow work of rebuilding a life. "We'd be honored," Sarah smiled. It was the first real smile he'd ever seen from her. "Thank you, Jake, for everything." She drove away. Jake stood holding the invitation, watching her car disappear around the corner. Margaret appeared at his elbow. "What was that about closure?" He showed her the envelope. "And new beginnings." Margaret read the invitation. Her eyes went soft. "She's getting married. Next month. She wants us there. Then we'll be there." Margaret tucked her arm through his. "That's what family does." Family. The word still felt strange in Jake's mouth. For 60 years, family had meant blood and obligation. Parents who expected things he couldn't give. A daughter he couldn't save. Brothers in arms who understood him better than anyone, but still kept their distance. But this Margaret, the diner, the town, the brothers who gathered once a year, this was family too. Chosen family. Built family. The kind that didn't happen by accident, but by decision, by commitment, by showing up day after day and choosing the same people over and over. "You're thinking again," Margaret said. "Bad habit." "I know something that helps." "What's that?" She led him back inside, back to the chaos and laughter and warmth of 200 bikers eating breakfast. Back to the life they'd built together. "Work," she said, pressing an apron into his hands. "Always helps." Jake Morrison, retired Marine biker accidental hero, tied the apron around his waist and got to work. The afternoon brought a different kind of visitor. Sheriff Samuel Thompson walked into the diner during the quiet hours between lunch and dinner. He was wearing his uniform badge gleaming, but his face was troubled. "Samuel." Jake set down the glass he'd been cleaning. "Coffee?" "Please." Samuel sat at the counter, removed his hat, rubbed his forehead. "I need to talk to you about something." "You look worried." "I am worried." Samuel accepted the coffee, wrapped his hands around it without drinking. "I got a call this morning from a town about 3 hours east of here. Little place called Millbrook. Population maybe 5,000. Never heard of it. Neither had I. But they've heard of Cedar Falls. They've heard of what happened here. And they're asking for help. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Something he'd thought had finally settled. What kind of help? Same kind we needed. Local sheriff running the town like his personal kingdom. Citizens too scared to speak up. State police too corrupt to investigate. Samuel finally took a sip of his coffee. Sound familiar? Too familiar. The woman who called her name's Teresa Martinez. She's a teacher at the local school. 3 months ago, the sheriff's son assaulted one of her students. Girl was 15. Teresa reported it. Nothing happened. Then she lost her job. Then her house burned down. Jake's hands tightened on the counter. She's been reaching out to everyone she can think of. FBI told her they don't have jurisdiction. State police told her to file a complaint. Local news won't touch it because the sheriff owns the only radio station in town. Samuel looked at Jake. She asked me if the bikers who saved Cedar Falls might be willing to save Millbrook too. For a long moment, Jake didn't speak. He thought about the road, about the work that never ended, about the endless parade of small towns with big problems and no one willing to help. Then he thought about Margaret, about the life he'd built, about the promise he'd made to stop running. "I'll need to make some calls," he said finally. "I figured you would. And I can't go myself, not this time. I've got responsibilities here." Samuel smiled. "I figured that too. But you've got brothers, don't you, brothers who might be looking for their next mission." Jake thought about Tommy, about Big Mike, about all the men who'd ridden into Cedar Falls and helped save a town that wasn't theirs. "I might know a few. That's all I'm asking." Samuel stood, put his hat back on. "Think about it. Let me know." He left. Jake stood alone behind the counter, the weight of 2 worlds pressing on his shoulders. Margaret found him there an hour later, still standing, still thinking. "Samuel told me about Millbrook." "Of course he did. He also told me you said you couldn't go, that you had responsibilities here." She stepped behind the counter, stood beside him. "Jake, look at me." He did. Her eyes were serious, but not angry. "I didn't ask you to stay so you could stop being who you are. I asked you to stay so you could have a home to come back to. There's a difference. You want me to go? I want you to do what's right, what you've always done." She touched his face. "If Millbrook needs help, then help them. Send your brothers. Go yourself if you have to. But when it's done, come back. Come home. And you'll be here. I'll always be here." She kissed him. "That's what home means." Jake made his calls. 3 days later, 12 motorcycles rolled out of Cedar Falls heading east toward Millbrook. Tommy was in the lead. Big Mike was riding shotgun. The rest were brothers who'd heard about the mission and volunteered without hesitation. Jake watched them go from the doorway of the diner. Margaret stood beside him, her hand in his. "Think they'll be okay?" "They'll be more than okay. They'll be exactly what that town needs. And when they're done, when Millbrook is saved, and there's another town after that, and another after that, then we'll help them too." Jake turned to her. "That's what we do now, Margaret. That's what Cedar Falls does. We take the broken places and we fix them. We take the scared people and we give them courage. We take the stories that end in tragedy and we rewrite them. Big ambitions for a diner owner and a retired biker. The biggest," he smiled. "Think we can handle it." Margaret looked at the road where the motorcycles had disappeared, looked at the town that had risen from the ashes of its own corruption, looked at the man who'd ridden in from nowhere and changed everything. "I think we can handle anything." The sun was setting over Cedar Falls. The diner's lights glowed warm against the gathering dusk. Inside, the dinner crowd was starting to arrive locals who'd become family strangers, who'd become friends, a community that had learned to stand together. Jake Morrison hung up his apron, poured 2 cups of coffee, carried them to the booth where he and Margaret always sat, the corner booth, the one with the crack in the upholstery, the one where everything had begun. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his cup. "To justice," Margaret replied. "To home." They drank together, watching through the window as the first stars appeared in the Texas sky. Somewhere out there, 12 motorcycles were riding toward another fight, another town that needed saving, another group of people who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up. But here in this diner, in this town, in this moment, the battle was won. Justice had come to Cedar Falls, and Jake Morrison had finally found his way home.